Well, it's not really ultimately up to whether or not I believe it was true or not, is whether it was actually true or not. And so I am not shocked at all that the SEC has already started inquiring as to whether or not his statement was true, that he secured funding. And then he continued the snowball effect by saying that the only contingency was shareholder approval. So whether that means that there actually was a tender offer is a whole nother issue. And so this continues to snowball with the statements, whether or not they're true. But I think more importantly and fundamentally to the SEC, in addition to whether or not this is fraudulent statements or market manipulation, this is ultimately a disclosure issue. And whether or not this was proper disclosure.
So help us, though, with this from a very legal perspective, and this goes to the definition of whether is. For Elon Musk's tweet to be true, does he need a signed term sheet from some funding source? Is that what would be required? Could he say, I had a conversation with so-and-so, and they said they'd be happy to do it? Would that be funding secured?
Well, this is ultimately the analysis the SEC is going to make as to what funding secured means. But my understanding and my perspective is that this should be something that they already have deal documents for. There's a lot of communication. If funding is secure, there are actually documents in place for this. And if the only contingency is shareholder approval, that would lead to me to believe that the board has actually voted on this. And we have a statement from the board saying that it was raised last week. So it seems rather unlikely that the board has already approved this. So for the shareholder approval to be the only contingency, it seems rather unlikely.
It would be unusual, but could you see a situation, I would recommend it, by the way, just given that the markets are so unhinged about this situation, for the SEC to come out publicly and say, I mean, in a very immediate way, we've looked into this, and here's where things stand right this second, given all the uncertainty around the situation?
The SEC's investigation is going to take some time. What I expect them to speak on probably earlier rather than later would be the method of disclosure and whether or not this was actually a recognized distribution channel, and also whether or not this was broad, non-exclusive public dissemination of this information. And given the chaos and confusion in the market, I would expect for the SEC to weigh in on this aspect earlier rather than later.
And would they weigh in on it themselves, or would they force Tesla to come out with a new disclosure?
I'm surprised that Tesla hasn't already made some sort of disclosure, especially through an 8K, indicating the exact facts and circumstances around this transaction and what's been going underway. Because there's such confusion, obviously, still in the market. This is not a piecemeal type of disclosure issue where you put this type of information out and you expect the investors to hunt for it and try and figure out what it could be, and all these questions as to what he's saying means. These are all questions that should be answered from the get-go, and this shouldn't be some sort of piecemeal disclosure
Phil LeBeau's in Chicago.
puzzle.
He's got a question for you. Phil.
Teresa, this is Phil LeBeau. I have a question. After this came out and this discussion started about whether or not this was some type of an SEC violation by Elon Musk, immediately you started hearing from his supporters saying, oh, it's just Elon being Elon. What's the big deal? I'm curious from your perspective, what's the worst case scenario here? If this is truly a violation, what's the worst case scenario for Tesla and for Elon Musk?
Well, Elon Musk could be civilly and criminally prosecuted. There could be significant fines associated with this. The company not coming forward and issuing an 8K or a proper public disclosure clarifying for the market and bringing an end to this chaos and confusion, that could be further violations for Tesla. His continued tweets, each of those has a snowball effect, because whether or not they're true, those are each individual violations if they're untrue. And the continued use of Twitter rather than a recognized customary distribution channel that's non-exclusive and really wide, fair and efficient dissemination of information. Right. These are all one on top of one another.
You mentioned criminal prosecution. I mean, I associate that with what if this were a pump and dump because he was trying to get the stock up and then could sell or whatever. That would sound to me criminal. What do you think could potentially be criminal beyond what would be maybe obvious civil issues if indeed the stuff turns out not to be true that he said?
Well, if he had the intent to manipulate the stock price, which some are saying that he really was trying to goose the stock price. So whether or not that's true, that intent
even
to
if he was trying to
manipulate.
flush out the shorts, meaning even if there's an email that shows that his intent in part was to flush out the shorts, to hurt the shorts, would that constitute market manipulation?
Yes, indeed it would. If he's trying to increase the value of the price for that reason, yes, that's intent. And also his statements being false, being misleading, omitting material facts. It's very difficult to make a statement like this in a tweet. That's 10b-5. That's securities fraud. That's criminal and
Teresa,
civil.